Okay, Earth Explorers, we have about 1 minute till showtime. Bring in the studio in about 1 minute. This will give you a chance to get connected, for all the affiliates to connect. America Free Radio will start in about 1 minute. Good to see you out there, old dog. Glad you're feeling better and on the mend. Not quite human, blue water. Excellent. We have a lot to go over. Okay, let's bring the studio in. Greetings, Earth Explorers. Welcome to X Squared Radio. I'm your host, Brooks Agnew, coming to you live from an undisclosed location east of the Appalachian Mountains. This is where the past meets the future. In here, the results are always positive. We might go a little past your imagination, but have no fear. You will be safely traveling with us. So we have a lot to go over tonight, lots of news. We are streaming live through the Truth Frequency Radio Network, out through TalkStream Live to radio stations all over the world. We are also streaming live through the America Free Radio studios outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, on Foxhole, Twitch, Facebook, DLive, Twitter, YouTube, and Rumble, and also Foxhole. We cannot forget our good friends at Foxhole. Methods does a fantastic job of putting that platform together. We will allow YouTube to stay with us until we get into what we call the free speech zone. At that point, Google routinely violates our First Amendment constitutional rights, so we do not let YouTube host the rest of that program. So we will be saying goodbye to YouTube sometime during the night. The notifications have gone out. You people have already signed up and are responding. Resto Man 59's out there in Joshua Tree, California. Wow. I love the stars out there in Joshua Tree. It's just so cool to walk out without the light pollution and see the stars of the upper desert. Yes, many things going on. Thanks, Baba Susie, for the good notes out there. All right, let's get started because we have a lot to go over tonight, and some of this stuff is pretty powerful. Let me make sure my volume's up a little bit here. So we recently had Veterans Day. Many of you did not celebrate it. Some of the banks did. We didn't celebrate it at work. It's just one of those days of remembrance we kind of cruise through, and we don't really remember what the day is for, why we revere it. Many Americans have no idea that we celebrated Veterans Day on November 11th. And those that know that the holiday began as Armistice Day typically think of it as a day of victory and peace. But for those on the ground in Europe, the last 24 hours before the cessation of hostilities on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, that day was nothing less than hell on earth. 103 years ago this week, Allied commanders ordered U.S. Marines and Army personnel to attempt a perilous night crossing on the Meuse River and assault the heavily defended German positions on the far side. Prescient General Black Jack Pershing foresaw the possible rise of Germany and wanted to make it clear the Allies had won the war by seizing more German-controlled territory. Scores of men would die. in an attack that ultimately proved a tragic loss of life. I retell the story tonight because I want you to remember it. It'll go down, it'll be recorded here, and you can come back and listen to it and send your friends, your children, your grandchildren to it. It follows 8 American heroes who accomplished extraordinary feats in some of the war's most important battles. Several of those body bearers at the ceremony where the unknown soldier was laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery took part, actually, in that final barrage on the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Body bearer Corporal Thomas Saunders, a Native American from Wyoming who received the Distinguished Service Cross and other honors for his previous heroism at Jalny, worked with the other members of the 2nd Engineers to construct the flimsy footbridges that would span the river. German artillery had destroyed all the permanent bridges in the area, so Saunders and his comrades designed some floating bridges that they hoped would last long enough to get their men across. To avoid enemy snipers, they prefabricated the bridges in sections, each roughly the width of a ladder and 12 feet long, well back from the front lines. Teams of mules then hauled the sections near the river. The Americans knew the Germans had countless fortified machine gun nests along the banks of the Meuse, as well as heavy artillery zeroed in on the likely crossing points. Stepping out onto the footbridges without cover fire would have met immediate death. To cover up the German defenses, American field artillery, including body bearer and color sergeant James W. Dell's 75mm artillery battery, began the attack by firing for an hour straight on the narrow strip of land between the riverbank and the woods beyond. When the hour was up, they turned their guns on known German positions, hoping to keep them pinned down long enough for the Marines to make their crossing. Fortunately for the Americans, the weather was working in their favor. A thick, cold fog settled in, shrouding their movements and deadening sound. In single file, the Marines attached to the 49th Company, including body bearer and gunnery sergeant Ernest Jansen, trudged through the darkness in total silence. The men were intensely uncomfortable. They were tired from weeks of hard fighting, and their uniforms were soaked through. Many suffered the effects of the worldwide influenza plague of 1918, but they stifled their coughs and their sneezes, knowing that the smallest sound would bring German machine gun fire down on their heads. Saunders and the fighting engineers led their way, carrying the heavy footbridge sections above their heads. They struggled to keep their footing on the slippery rocks, but somehow managed to float the bridge out onto the freezing water. A brave engineer clung to the front of the contraption, rifle in hand, kneeling on the waterlogged planks as they floated across the river. Miraculously, the current drifted the lone soldier along the Meuse, and he tied the guide line onto a tree on the eastern side. The Americans had succeeded in creating a path across the river, but it was a path straight into the mouth of hell. The engineers actually placed 2 bridges across the river that night in separate locations, but the Germans destroyed one almost immediately. With no way to cross, the 6th Marines turned around and dug shallow fighting holes in a nearby wood. Undoubtedly, the rumors of an approaching armistice played a role in their decision. For several days, the men had been talking about a possible end to the war. Unbeknownst to the men, the two sides actually signed a peace deal at 5:45 a.m. on the morning of November 11th, but General Pershing chose not to provide that information to the men fighting on the banks of the Meuse. He merely passed along the order to cease fire at exactly 11 a.m. Many of the leathernecks and soldiers on the front lines would perish in the intervening hours. As the Marines approached the river, a gleaming white star shell arced across the inky sky, silhouetting Saunders and his men, along with members of the Jansen's 49th Company and other Marines. Staccato fire from machine guns obliterated the relative silence. An enemy patrol set up their Maxims on the far bank and sprayed lead like a fire hose. Men slid and slipped down the embankment next to the river. Shrapnel from artillery shells tore through their ranks. One man counted 25 killed or wounded in the space of 100 yards. The bridge, come this way. Come on, Marines. Saunders and the other engineers called to the Marines behind them. The men dashed across the rickety contraption. Some made it to the other side. Some, struck with machine gun fire along the way, fell into the water. Many others never even got to the water, their bodies piled up on the eastern side of the river. However, scores had made it across when the Germans scored a direct hit on the bridge. The men on the western side of the river were now trapped in enemy territory. They formed a perimeter. They dug in, and they prepared to hold for as long as they could. Staring down annihilation, the Marines did not know the war would end within hours. What the Marines did know is that they had leaders they trusted and followed to the very end. They had each other, a fellowship forged only in battle. This bond kept many of the men alive. Many Marines died there on that eastern bank of the Meuse before the guns suddenly went silent at 11 a.m. At a congressional hearing after the war, Pershing and his command would claim they were under the direction of Marshal Foch and had no orders to cease fighting until 11 a.m. on November 11th. Often recipients of poor equipment, tactics, and in some cases poor leadership, the doughboys adapted and defeated the superb Imperial German army. Unsung, they were a great generation, and they changed the world. It is their willingness to serve to the end, and if need be, to sacrifice. The same spirit embodied by multiple generations of men and women in the U.S. military. That's why we celebrate Veterans Day. There are a lot of us out here. We never face that. Hopefully we never will. But there are millions of us, tens of millions of us out here watching our country be ripped apart, disgraced, embarrassed, betrayed by traitors inside our government. We can't stand it. And we don't want to put up with it. But we will follow. Some will lead. Some will die. Please never forget Veterans Day. It's why you have your freedom. Thank you for letting me share that with you. Now you know why there's no such thing as an ex-Marine. As you know, I have a Scottish heritage. Sometimes I'm actually proud of it. But Lulu is a major nightclub in Edinburgh, and it has begun marketing itself to unvaccinated Scots by advertising the fact that the door staff will not be carrying out checks on whether customers have been jabbed. Now, by placing seats, chairs on the dance floor, the venue is asserting that it no longer qualifies as a nightclub and should be under the same rules as pubs, which aren't mandated to ask for vaccine passports. You don't need a vaccine passport to party with us, the venue announced, adding that normal service had been resumed. Only venues that provide a space for dancing by customers count as nightclubs under the rules, thereby creating a loophole which is easily exploited. Hospitality industry representatives said clubs across Scotland were exploiting the loophole so they could ignore the vaccine passport rules, according to the report. The vaccine passport's guidance is so shambolic that places which are clearly not nightclubs are being billed as nightclubs, and places that are clearly nightclubs are managing to use loopholes to claim they're not. That was Murdo Fraser, my imitation of him, the Scottish Conservative spokesman for COVID recovery. And after Scotland first tried to introduce vaccine passport, the process was called an unmitigated disaster, with staff at nightclubs receiving abuse and the technology repeatedly failing. In Ireland, meanwhile, masks were made a mandatory condition to enter to nightclubs, but are not required to be worn while dancing, prompting widespread ridicule. No kidding. Yeah, I get it, old dog. I get it. Oh, you were wondering that, eh? He says, I wonder if you were Scottish. It does show. Okay, well, thanks you very much. Like I said, I'm occasionally proud of it. Papa Susie says, been to Scotland many times. The Outer Hebrides are very interesting. Great people and pubs. Love the Scotch, too. Yeah, I'm not a Highlander. I'm from the west coast of Scotland, a little town called Stranraer. It's where the ferry goes to Belfast. And it sits along Agnew Bay, which is enclosed by Agnew Crescent, and on Agnew Crescent is Agnew Park. So you get an understanding where the Agnews come from. That's where we come from. All right. What's going on out there? We've seen this crazy budget. By the way, you know, a convention of states, one of the things that we push for with convention of states, there are really four main areas that we push for. Of course, there's a lot of controversy about this. People say, oh, you'll be opening Pandora's box. You know, some billionaire will come in and buy the whole thing. It's utter nonsense. To get 34 states to come together to call the damn thing has been an impossibility since 1787. It's never been done. But if 34 states could get together, a little bit like herding hungry cats, then they have to have debate, and they have to agree, and they have to come up with these amendments, and then they have to put them out for ratification. It takes 38 states to do that, go figure. Every single time, all 17 times that the Constitution has been amended, it has been Congress that has put it together. And you see what an unmitigated cluster F that has been. So it's time for the states to put it together. Here are the four areas, generally speaking, and I'll make my point with the final one. The first one, of course, 67% of the delegates agree that term limits for Congress and the Senate should be the First Amendment, the 28th Amendment to the Constitution. There is some disagreement, and there is also some agreement. We don't know exactly how many terms to limit it to. We're thinking 3 terms for the Senate, 18 years, and we're thinking of changing the term of Congress from 2 years to 4 years, because when the 1787 Constitutional Convention was done, it was a really inconvenience to be a congressman. It was a part-time job. It took 3 weeks to get there by horseback or walking. And nobody wanted to serve full-time because it didn't pay very much. And people had farms. They had shops. They had businesses, mines and forests and things they had to manage. So they only wanted to work part-time, and so it was a burden. So they made it 2 years so that it could be shared among the common people. But of course, as time went on, it became more and more valuable to be a congressman. You could sell your power. You could become part of the corruption, and the pay got better and better. So when a congressman gets elected, he immediately has to go into fundraising mode and try to raise money because he's got to run for election again in 16 months. So we change it to 4 years to take the money out of the politics, to take the money out of those congressional races. And then we limit them to 3 terms. So you'll have congressmen for 12 years, senators for 18 years. That sounds fair, doesn't it? That's what I originally wrote in my 2012 book called Alienated Nation, and I still stand on it. Now, the Senate's a little different story. The Senate didn't always run for election at large. In fact, they weren't elected at all. They were appointed by state legislatures. Of course, there were cries of cronyism and, blah, blah, blah. But what they decided to do was take the politics away from local venues, local state legislatures, and make it federal. And that's when senators started running for at large, and their elections went from $500,000 to $1 million to $10 million to $50 million to run for a Senate seat because, they control 1/100th of the budget of the United States. And so it becomes one where influence is highly prized. 2 terms for the Senate? I think 3, because it takes 1 term just to figure out where all the bathrooms are up there in Washington. Senators, you know what I'm saying. 18 years is long enough to establish some leadership, some voice, some recognition as a leader, not only in the Senate but also in the country. But right now, we have senators for 24, 30, 36 years, and it's crazy. It's a dynasty. It's a royalty, and we don't want that. So the second area, which is even more controversial, about 50% of the delegates are pretty solid on what they want to do, is the Commerce Clause. The Commerce Clause in the Constitution is very vague, it's very ambiguous, and the courts and legislators have taken advantage of that, building precedent upon precedent upon precedent, beginning, of course, with FDR. And they created a whole new government, a whole new agency government. Agencies, departments, bureaus, and administrations, all under the executive branch, which was supposed to be 2 guys, right? And a cabinet. It grew into this multi-trillion-dollar behemoth with millions and millions of federal employees, and you can't stop it. These bureaucrats are the ones that assess all our taxes, put fines and fees and police actions. They're the ones that take all your stuff. They're the ones that consume all the tax money, all of it. So the agreement is that the delegates want to put an amendment to the Constitution to define the Commerce Clause and remove the federal power of the 3-letter agencies, all of them. The FDA, the IRS, all of that loses its federal authority. The third one is, thank you, Sarah, on Twitch. Glad to see that you got your ivermectin. That is good news. The third one is to repeal the 16th Amendment. I didn't finish the Senate. You're right. I didn't. Besides not running for election at large, there is a piece of the amendment that is in debate. Okay, there will eventually be agreement, but the debate is to return Senate races to the states, to return it to the state legislators. Okay, the state legislation picks the 2 senators for the state. What does this do? Oh my God, it will take so much money out of politics. All the corruption, all the McCains and the Hironos, they all go away, okay? All that goes away. It goes back to the state legislators. Now, the good news is you can see your legislator simply by going to the state legislature. If you complain to the state legislature, they can recall a senator in 90 days. You don't have this Washington insulation that goes on the Senate. And so you don't have to go all the way to Washington and try to make an appointment and, donate $1,000 so that you can get 5 minutes of time with your senator. I think it's a good idea. I think it needs to be debated. I think it needs to be agreed upon, and I think it needs to be amended in the Constitution. Okay. The third one, of course, is to do away with the 16th Amendment, which is the federal government's right to tax income. It removes what is called the zero basis assumption. And that zero basis assumption means that everything that you do, everything that you are, is worth zero. Big fat goose eggs. It doesn't matter what you do. I don't care if you're a doctor or an engineer or an inventor. It doesn't matter. Everything you do is worth nothing. And thereby, everything you earn on a W-2 is profit. And that's how they tax it. All that goes away. The federal government will no longer have the right to know how much you earn. It's none of their business. None of their business. Make as much money as you damn well please. But when you spend it, that's when you're going to pay the tax. A federal sales tax, often called a value-added tax sometimes, will be assessed to all purchases. And you could, if you want to, you could exempt, the working poor, people making less than, $40,000 a year, $30,000 a year, $20,000 a year. You could make it to where those people don't have to pay their federal tax, and thus they get a little break on stuff. But three things will change the economy totally. The first is that there is no invasion of your privacy, and there's no requirement for you to waive your Fifth Amendment right. When you sign a 1040 or an easy 1040, you waive your Fifth Amendment right. You are incriminating yourself. That goes away. Totally goes away. No more tax forms filed. No more tax attorneys. None of that crap. Only for businesses will that exist, not for individuals. The second thing that will happen is that the government will realize an enormous windfall in income. Why? Because they will no longer be concerned with how much people earn, which is a very difficult thing to determine, because people hide it. They work for cash, or they have nonprofits, or they have shell corporations, and they move the money around different ways. The corporation buys a house, which they live in. The LLC buys a car, which they drive. Okay, all that stuff is hidden. But all that stuff, when the purchases are made, the taxes will be paid. And that means a huge windfall in income for the federal government. At the same time, the overhead, the 80,000 plus, they got new 67,000 more IRS agents, all that goes away. All that income goes away. 150,000 high paying jobs disappear. Okay? You no longer have to support that burden. And the incredible behemoth, which is known as the IRS. The third thing that happens is you tax everybody inside this country. Tourists, illegals, every single living soul in this country will pay the tax. You gain more taxpayers, you gain more tax and less overhead. Plus, you don't have to wait till April 15th for your money. It comes in steadily. Every single Friday it comes in. And that's the way it works. So that's what the Convention of States will do. And the fourth and final amendment to the Constitution, and this is probably more important than anything else. I know it sounds crazy, right? Those are pretty important amendments. But when the 1787 convention was over, the nation was small. The nation was small, right? There were only 20 states. By the time the Civil War happened, there were only 20 states. And the issue that they faced in those days was a rural nation. It was an agrarian nation. People were farmers. They were miners. They were loggers. They were fishermen, right? It was not an industrial world yet. And they could not have foreseen the future where states became as rich and powerful and populous as nations. So this was a big issue that they could not have foreseen. What they did have set up was a system of writing laws. Congress would write the bill. It would go through debate. Congress would vote on it, pass it. It would go to the Senate. The Senate would review it from their perspective, their House of Lords perspective, and they would sign it or they would edit it and send it back to the Congress to go to committee. And eventually it would become a bill that was sent to the president for signature. One bill, one law. The president would veto it or he would sign it. That changed. When the Clintons moved into the White House, the way laws were created changed. They were no longer written by Congress. Congress had nothing to do with writing laws. The laws began to be written by globalist think tanks. Think tanks would create these bills, and these bills began to grow in size. And they would then, once they were completed, in those days they were a few hundred pages. By the time Obama became president, they were thousands of pages. And now with Biden, and through Trump and now Biden, there's several thousand pages. Inside those several thousand pages are several hundred laws. One bill, 300, 400, 500 laws. The problem is, and this is why this Fourth Amendment to the Constitution is absolutely vital for the Republic. Probably more important than all the other amendments combined. It's a simple 3 words. Line, item, veto. Line, item, veto. Line, item, veto is so important because it allows the president, it restores to the president his power to veto. He can take a black highlighter and he can go through a 6,000-page bill and he can say, nope, 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 nope. He can pick the things, the individual laws inside that bill, and he can strike them. Now you think, well, that's too much power. No, it's not. That is the power of the executive, okay? He can't change the laws. He can't say, well, I don't like this when I rewrite it. Nope, he doesn't have that ability. He gets a black highlighter, and that's it. He can redact that law right then, and then he can sign it. Of course, a lot of those vetoes will be unpopular, but that's why you remove presidents, because they make unpopular decisions like that. Yes, some of it will be crony. Some of it will be special interest groups that he favors. But guess what? It's going to aim right at him and no one else. He can't blame it on the Speaker of the House. He can't blame it on some caucus somewhere or some hostage taking. Oh, we'll give him his money for his Defense Department as long as he gives us our money for the Green New Deal. You understand how that goes? And he can veto, but he can't write law. That needs to be restored. Those 4 amendments, that's why this story is so important. Because when you meet this new deal, you're going to realize it's the same as the old deal. What old deal? Well, 88 years ago this month, FDR crafted the collapse of the U.S. bond market. At the same time, he was designing a marketing program to sell bonds to poor Americans to support his war. And by the way, none of those bonds ever paid a penny either. Unlike Biden, FDR only required a few weeks to completely smash the hottest economy in world history. And coincidentally, it was also called the Roaring Twenties. The Democrats aren't very good at storytelling. Not even. To some of their own members, it is insanity, but they go along with it. The infrastructure bill was crafted by globalist think tanks, and Biden does a horrible job of describing it to us. You know this because you've watched him try. In fact, no one has even been afforded the opportunity to read it completely and understand it. Yeah, that's right, old dog. Same as the song. Let's start with the Virginia Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger's remark last week about the president. I'm going to quote, "Nobody elected him to be FDR. They elected him to be normal and stop the chaos," close quote. Really? Coastal Democrats give more thought to the political and cultural pressures faced by Democrats from their districts. People who live in New York or Washington, D.C. ought to actually take a drive out to where we live, out of their Beltway bubble, and make note of all the MAGA signs and gun shops and Confederate flags painted on the sides of buildings. It is not easy. It is not an easy place to be a Democrat out there. Tuesday's election last week was a complete and total massacre. If it had been more national, it would have made the 2010 absolute lawn mowing of Congress by Republicans when Obama's majority was in power. His majority was leaf blown into the gutter. That's what happened in 2010. Yeah, he had the House and the Senate, and he pushed the Affordable Care Act down our throats. And in 2010, his majority was hosed into the gutter. Well, Spanberger won the seat in the 2018 Democratic wave election, where the cheat by mail succeeded, by about 1.8%. And she was reelected in 2020 by almost exactly the same margin. With their razor-thin margin in the House, Spanberger was trailing Freitas, that was her opponent, when in-person voting results were reported Tuesday night. And Ballots R Us came through once again in the wee hours of the morning when several thousand votes from Spotsylvania County reported its final absentee ballots, and Henrico County had tallied additional absentee ballots as well. Imagine that. Absentee ballots are always Democrat, and they're always arriving late in just the right amounts. Now, when she says that people didn't elect Biden to be FDR, for all I know, she's correct with respect to the consensus view among people she talks to in her district. I doubt that district is teeming with New Deal fanatics. I doubt it. The truth is that everybody who voted for Virtual Joe and his gang of criminals did so precisely because they wanted him to be FDR. And it's not like this was some left-wing secret that, we conspiratorially hid pre-election to spring on the unsuspecting public. No. During the campaign, Virtual Joe talked all the time about FDR and the New Deal, as did Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. He was elected to smash the Trump economy once and for all. His job is to turn the stock market into sawdust, just the way FDR did. And in 2019, he was the candidate of restoration. But after the panic-demic hit, he became the candidate of seizing this moment of crisis to give Americans what virtually every other advanced democracy has always given their people: expanded health insurance as a right. You've heard it, right? You heard it today. Paid family leave, right? Subsidized child care, better public transit, and a whole list of welfare winnings that historically make elections so easy for Democrats. Merry Christmas. Do you remember what Virtual Joe said to Chris Cuomo in 2019? I'll refresh your memory. He said, I think it may not dwarf, but eclipse what FDR faced. We have an opportunity, Chris, to do so many things now to change some of the structural things that are wrong, some of the structural things we couldn't get anybody's attention on. And you heard Jen Psaki say the same thing on Friday. Virtual Joe doesn't want to pass up this opportunity when we are on our knees, when we are covered in sweat and blood and tears to change, fundamentally change this economy. He said, I can only presume that a big chunk of the 81 million people who voted for me were doing so because of these promises, not in spite of them. And this brings us to the story Democrats really need to tell. It's the story of how supply side and neo is neoliberal word that they throw around because nobody understands it. Economic hegemony. Over nearly the last 50 years, it has choked off public investment and transferred literally trillions of dollars of wealth from the middle class to the rich. That's what they do. That's their main goal. Smash the middle class and keep them out of our sandbox. A RAND study last year put the number of nearly $50 trillion. That's a lot of money. Put another way, to use numbers people can wrap their heads around, if since the late 1970s this country had followed the economic policies of the prior 30 years and not embraced, Milton Friedmanism and Reaganomics and their successors, and income had kept pace with growth, the median income in 2018 would not have been the $36,000 it actually was. It would have been around $57,000. How many of you would have your lives changed if your income had actually changed by that much? The Democrats wanted to keep you from doing that. That's the economic story of the United States over the past 4 decades. And there's a number called the Gini coefficient. That's Gini. And it measures income inequality on a scale from 1 to 100. It isn't easy to calculate. It's a little like your credit score. In golf, by the way, lower scores are better with this. So America's best ever Gini score was around 35. But that was way back in 1968. Today, it's getting close to 50, actually a little better than that. For comparison, the Scandinavian countries were always best in the low to mid-20s. That is to say, the difference between the rich and the middle class. And South Africa has always been the worst at about 63. You have the ultra-elite and you have people that live on dirt floors. We are much closer to the most unequal society than the least. Now, there's obviously a lot more I could say here, for example, about, labor's declining share of national income, a few other things like that. Middle class doesn't have the investments that it had back in the late 50s and early 60s. But the bottom line is that you see the world through this kind of economic lens, okay? You realize that even when the economy today is, what people would call good, like I asked somebody the other day how much disposable income they had. I don't care what they make. I want to know at the end of the month how much money is left. And I just wanted a nod of the head. I asked, so is it $3,000? And they rolled their eyes like, oh, yeah, sure. $2,000? And they kind of leaned their head to the side. I said, $1,000? And they went, like, okay, so we're talking about $500 to $1,000. They said, yeah, it's about $500 to $1,000 a month. That's their disposable income. Well, I got news for you, Earth Explorers. Before I got my college education, it was less than that. It was about $400 a month. That was my disposable income. That was all the movies, all the little, mini vacations you take on a weekend with your kids to a water park or something like that. $400 a month. You don't pay off credit cards with that. You don't pay down debt with that. You make your payments right on time. You slug your way through the month. Every single month you borrow money to buy Christmas gifts. That's the reality, isn't it? Yes? That's what the Democrats want. Spanberger spent her career not in economics, not in business. She spent her career in the CIA. Yeah, she spent her career in the CIA. So I don't have any idea of the extent to which she does or does not think about, all this stuff. But if she doesn't think about it, I wish she would. And further, if she doesn't, that's on Nancy Pelosi to some extent. Pelosi ought to be organizing economic history seminars for her caucus and people like Cecilia Rouse and Heather Bushney and Jared Bernstein of the Council of Economic Affairs. Oh, you just haven't even heard it. You haven't even heard the latest. Democrats should not be happy with an economy like 2019's. They should want an economy that is reimagined to give fewer benefits to the well-off and more to the middle class and poor, right? You'd think that's what they're all about. But no, that's not it. I get the political point. But on a vote this important, people should vote not on the way it sounds, not on the way people look, but on the merits. On the merits. This was the biggest piece of public investment legislation of its kind, literally, since the Eisenhower administration. Those 6 Democrats put themselves on the record as being against that. Kudos to these people, right? No. They're tearing the nation apart. They're breaking the nation. President Biden's proposal to require roughly 700 U.S. billionaires to pay taxes annually on what they call unrealized capital gains. Democrats love it. They love it. They want it. Absolutely. You know what an unrealized capital gain is, right? Let's say that you buy a house in, let's say, when things were really going good. Let's say in 2018, 2017, you bought a house. And you paid, let's just say, to make the numbers round, let's say $250,000 for that house. Well, now here it is 5 years later, and that house is now worth $350,000 because price of real estate went up, building materials, you know what I'm saying, $350,000. That means that you now have an unrealized capital gain of $100,000. But wait, you said, I'm not selling my house. I mean, if I sold it today for $350,000, yeah, then I would put $100,000 in my pocket. And unless I invested it in another piece of real estate, I would pay taxes on that. But that's what they want to do. They want to call it an unrealized capital gain, and they want to tax you anyway on it, as though it is income, even though you haven't realized it yet. That's what they want to do. They think that this plan will raise as much as $250 billion to pay for expanding the social safety net, not Social Security, by the way, and tackling climate change. That's it. The current tax system is too complicated. They can't seem to, figure out a way to cheat their money. So they're going after the 700 billionaires, and they're saying, we're gonna tax you on your unrealized capital gain. Well, guess who's for that? Well, everybody is. You know why? Because there's only 700 of them, and there's 300 million of us, right? It's mob rule. These people have no right to be billionaires. Oh, I'm just saying what people say, right? Nobody should be a billionaire, right? they should take all their money. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a post on social media that, the top 20 richest men, if we just took their money, we could feed the hungry. Yeah, you could for a summer, and then the money would be gone. And so would your rich people. So would the ability to do business, to invest money, to expand things and hire people, and manage people, and buy goods and cover, indemnify, leasing programs. All that would go away. The proposal that the Democrats want to do reinvents how government taxes investments. And not for everyone, but just the few hundred richest people, for now. Because eventually you're going to be among them. Don't think you're insulated against it. Under the current plan, under this current discussion, capital gains on stocks and other traded assets would be taxed only for U.S. taxpayers with over $1 billion in assets or $100 million in income for 3 consecutive years. That's just to get the foot in the door. That's to get the camel's nose in the tent. Currently, the tax code requires the investor to pay a capital gains tax only when the investor sells the asset, when they sell the stock, when they exercise the option, then they pay the tax. That's why they don't do it. That's why they hold on to it, because of the capital gains. But you see, holding on to it's good, because if they don't sell that asset, they don't sell that investment, the company they invested in gets to use the capital to grow. They buy equipment, they expand their building, they acquire suppliers. But if you take that investment away, all that economic support for industry disappears. And lawmakers are aiming to effectively increase the taxes rich people pay, and because they want to rewrite the rules. And don't think it just affects the rich, because wait until you hear the rest of this story, because I'm going to continue it after the break. The thing that you have to pay close attention to here is that, you may have 700 people that make a lot of money, but there are 700,000 people that make pretty good money. Yeah, 1,000 times that money is just laying out there. And once you get, the David Ikes or the once you get the David Ikes or the Alex Joneses or the fringe guys, the guys that you think are really nutty, once you get them out of the way, of course, everybody else, it's about time. Good night. Those people were so loud. They were so crazy. But the rules, the mechanisms that they put in place allows them to go after people like Red Pill 78 and X22 and Sargent and, Space Shot and me and others, because now they have the precedent set. And they do, and that's exactly what they're going to do. So this proposal is so far in the other field of reality. I'm trying to shock your senses so that you understand what's going on here. So that you don't say, yeah, go get those rich guys, spread their money around. I could use some over here. They're not going to write you a check. They're going to write themselves a check, baby. For example, a rare but valuable item like let's say a precious painting or a rare musical album or a stamp or a work of art of some kind, it would be impossible to tax this. And it raises the question on how do you assess the value of these less liquid assets? Okay, it's not a stock, it's not a security, you don't really know what it's worth. Well, it's worth what someone will pay for it, right? A Van Gogh or a Monet or, Rembrandt or even a lesser famous artist, you don't know what those are worth, right? They'll go to one auction and then another. You don't know how to assess these less liquid investments, right? So they have a bigger incentive to hire high-priced tax accountants, right, and tax lawyers to fight the IRS every step of the way because they don't want these things assessed in a way that's going to cost them a lot of money if they don't sell it. I mean, would billionaires receive massive tax write-offs on unrealized losses in their portfolio? I mean, what if you bought a Picasso and you paid $10 million for it, and the auctioneer laughed all the way to the bank because he knows that painting isn't worth any more than $500,000. But you don't find that out until, a year after the sale. You frame it and you put it in your private gallery, and some of your artsy-fartsy friends come over. Oh, there's a Picasso. Yes, the last time that painting sold, it was $500,000. And the investor goes, what? I just paid $10 million for that. Well, guess what he has? He has an unrealized loss of $9.5 million. Does he get to write that off? Hell no. He doesn't get to write it off. You see, that's what makes these IRS rules so unfair. So unfair. What if that $250,000 house that you bought in 2018 isn't worth $350,000? What if there's a crash in the market? What if the best you can get out of that house is $125,000 because there's been a massive foreclosure push? Do you get to write off the unrealized loss of $125,000? Hell no. You would if you sold it, I reckon. You could claim that, but nobody wants to. They hold on to it, right? So the Bezos, the Gates, the Buffetts, forget about those guys. They're small potatoes as far as in numbers. There are thousands of billionaires, thousands of them, that are only billionaires on paper. They don't make $300 million a year. They make maybe $40 or $50 million a year as an income. They might make, their investments might make interest, or they may grow in value, or they may lose value. You see, it doesn't go both ways, and so it's not fair. And it's designed to attrit the system. It's designed to attrit the system. So TFR is going to go on break here in about 5 seconds. We will let them do that, and then when they come back to break, I'm gonna keep covering this and let you know where we are. I'm also going to show you a little film. I cannot show it to you while YouTube is hosting us because Google routinely violates our civil rights by not allowing us the right to free speech. So we are probably going to say goodbye to YouTube shortly after the break. Good evening out there, Crystal Clear. Nice to see you out there in Yelm, Washington. She's in Foxhole. Foxhole does an excellent job, don't you think? I mean, just the layout is it's just spectacular. I'm going to go ahead and turn the scratch-offs on so people can rack up some gold pills in there. I like to do that. Life of Brian, good to see you out there. Jacob. And Alara of Sirius is out there. We had a podcasters meetup on Saturday down in South Carolina, and it was glorious. We got to take a great walk around Greenville near Spartanburg, South Carolina. Got to meet everybody. We got a trophy. I don't know if I have my trophy here. I thought I had it here somewhere. I won a trophy for best gorilla story. I'm going to keep that for life. It's amazing. And we want to help all the other podcasters as much as we can because here's the deal, Earth Explorers. We're now the mainstream media. Yeah, go figure. It's no longer CNN. It's no longer Fox. It's us. We control this, and therefore we are the mainstream media. The mainstream has a cell phone. The mainstream has a tablet. And we're now the main news on that. Nobody watches Fox News on their phone. They watch us. They watch all of these fine hosts on Foxhole. Okay? They watch all these guys. Who we got? Who is live on Foxhole right now? Let me just look at him. Patriot News, Three Bear Men, PTP Podcast, Quite Frankly TV, Axe Truth, Salty Cracker. Who doesn't watch Salty Cracker? Okay? All those people are out there. Red Pill 78, X22. Let's see. Yeah, you got Wichter, you got Ian Trottier, you got all these great podcasters. They pour their hearts into their work and they have their listening audience. And together, we're the mainstream. We are the news. We are decentralized digital warriors. And they can't stop us. They cannot stop us. And I think, yeah, of course they're going to try. I'm going to show you how they're going to try here in just a second. You're going to see this. All right, TFR is coming back from break, and we will get into this. I'll give it about 20 seconds for the intro music to play. You don't hear it, but they hear it on the audio side. Okay, welcome back to Truth Frequency Radio, where the truth freaks hang out. Tuning in here will treat, cure, and prevent the disease of ignorance. Our call lines are open, so I believe that they're working. It's 213-233-3998. You can see it up there on the screen. And we'll let them stack up. And then we'll take some calls later. So how does this affect the mainstream media, us? There's the fake stream news, which is those guys over there on that screen, and they're attached to the cable or they're attached to your satellite, and they stream propaganda into your house that's written by a globalist think tank for the global syndicate through the global media empire to give you a global perspective on what a good citizen you can be. But the mainstream media, us, we will fill you in on everything else. We're the ones that'll get you thinking, that'll get you feeling, that will get you seeing what is really going on. So let's see, how many people we got hanging out there in YouTube? I hate to do this. All you good people out there that, over 20,000 of you subscribe to me on YouTube. I know it's not a very big audience, but we love you. We cherish you. I know that you get your notifications to be here. But right now we're going to say bye-bye to YouTube. So please look down below right here and you'll see all these free speech platforms. You see those? Twitch and Twitter and DLive and Foxhole and Rumble. All these great free speech platforms. You can transition to there and you can say bye-bye to YouTube with me. So we're going to starve them out right now.